When the organizers said that there was a lot of interest in innovation policy, I had no idea how sincere they were. And this is very encouraging. It's a great honor to be here, and I'm very much in debt to the director of BICRO and in particular to Gordon Vukovic, who was willing to wrestle with your administrative processes for only about 3 months in order to make my presence possible. So perhaps the first lesson of my visit is it shouldn't take 3 months. So we'll need to work on the administrative processes as well as other elements, and I'll return to that. I'd also, I'm very pleased to see that you had a number of ministers here. I think it's very important to have that participation and that focus, and I hope we can also talk a little bit about that. I have a couple of things to say, and I will try and illustrate them. But perhaps the most important thing I can tell you is that you're not alone in facing the types of challenges you're facing. What you just heard from your ministers sounds very similar to what President Obama has been saying in the United States. We face the same challenges. If you don't mind a small joke, and by the way, if at any point you think I'm trying to be funny, it's because I am trying to be funny. So I find that we have two options with many of the issues we face. One is crying, which is discouraging, and the other is laughing a little bit and then getting on with it. So what we need to do is laugh and then get on with it. One of the small jokes we have is I told a group of Americans that the good news is that we are the best in the world in technology transfer. The bad news is that we're not very good at it. Both statements are true. So we all have this challenge of how can we do better? You know, the Chinese have a wonderful curse, which is may you live in interesting times. And the good news is that we have some very real challenges in climate change and in global health, but we also have some very, very real opportunities. And those opportunities are increasingly international. EU is a mechanism for you. It has huge advantages, but you have to do it. You have to take the initiatives at the national level. And waiting for Brussels is a little bit like waiting for Godot. The support for innovative small businesses, but it has to be intelligent support. And above all, you need government, industry, and I should have university partnerships to help bring these things forward in the market. It's come to my attention that Croatia is not quite as large as China. On the other hand, China has lessons for us all. You know, I like to joke in the United States that the Chinese keep cheating. How do they cheat? Well, they keep building universities, they keep increasing their research budget, they keep investing in their children, when everyone knows you could stop collecting taxes, create a big deficit, and let your children pay it back. That's the American option. The Chinese choose to invest. May I make my first recommendation? Follow the Chinese model. If those of you who think that, well, that's China, China's huge, we're small, well, actually think through that again. Singapore, strangely similar population. They started in the 1960s with a per capita income of about $350. It is now in excess of $35,000 per capita. It's incredibly well focused. Invest, invest, and invest again. They have great assets in terms of infrastructure. They have great assets in terms of the universities they have. They don't have any space. So when they do an S&T park, they actually make them vertical. Quite literally, they just don't have the space. But Fusionopolis and Biopolis are outstanding. So the question is, when you have EU structural funds, how do you make sure that you're investing them intelligently and in a coherent fashion and rapidly? You can't wait. One of the things I'd like to point out to you is when you're looking around Europe, is look at what some of the best are doing. The best are reforming. They're changing already good institutions to make better universities. Look at the case of our Finns with Helsinki University of Technology that has now been changed to Finland's Aalto University. Very impressive. You know, it's very much like the best soccer teams. The guys who are winning are constantly bringing in outside experts to help them better. Those who are used to losing just don't seem to make that same effort, and there may be a connection here. They're mobilizing private capital for startups. They're introducing partnership programs. One of the things that I hope you would consider, one policy recommendation, would be perhaps getting a cutout, or what the French call an exemption, a dérogation, so that you can let small companies be relatively more free of some of the overhang you have on administrative burdens and taxes and so on, and for company formation and for company exit. Those are very important. I also don't want to leave out the opportunity you have through the 2020 program. But as I'll talk later, it is just one aspect, one element of an integrated approach. And let me caution you on something that I talk to all around Europe, whether the north or the middle or the south, and that is you have this inward focus that occurs sometimes. Everyone's comparing themselves to the EU average. Well, actually, you're not competing with an average, are you? And are you only competing with Finland and Germany and Austria? There is China, isn't there? You know, we'd like to be able to buy something on the street here that's not made in China. Just one or two things, without having a special shop dedicated to that as they have here in the hotel. So the point is, you're not competing with the average. You're competing with the rest of the world. So what about innovation in the US? Well, there's good news and bad news. And sometimes in the US it seems it's mainly bad news, but nonetheless. We have, underlying some of our current problems, we have very, very strong advantages in innovation. And you know, perhaps one of the most important is this one. We have positive social attitudes about science, about technology, about entrepreneurship. You know, as friends in France tell me, when someone succeeds as an entrepreneur in France, they always want to know how he cheated. You know, what did he do illegal to get there? Whereas in fact, we think Bill Gates is a national hero. We spend money on R&D. Why? Well, because it works. It pays off. You know, I hope you're all enjoying your telephones. I hope you're enjoying your hookups to our satellites. I hope you're enjoying the type of world that we've helped create through those investments. The framework conditions, and I'm going to talk today mainly about policy tools, things you can do that are pragmatic. And I want to apologize for those of you who are not specialists in this area, but there's some fairly detailed things that I'd like to go through. But most importantly, this high value that I just mentioned on commercial success, but also forgiving social norms. You know, you have to create, and this is where your press and your TV becomes very important. You have to create an environment where you're allowed to try, and if you don't succeed, you get to try again. You can't have a legal system that banishes you for 8 years from trying to form a company. That would be literally like everyone who takes a shot on goal in a soccer team. If you miss, you get pulled out and you can't play again for the rest of the game or for the rest of the season. That would really not encourage people to take shots, would it? Would you do that for a soccer team? No, you would not. So why do that to your businessmen? What's the gain? And again, if you need to make an adjustment to the bankruptcy rules, make an adjustment for the small companies. Make an adjustment for small high-tech companies. Do what you need to do, but do it. One of the things I find most discouraging when I'm talking to friends in Europe is that I don't have to change my talk very much. You know? In the 80s, we talked about labor market rigidities. The 1980s, children. This was a long time ago, okay? And the statement was that if you can't fire, you won't hire. A lot has gone on in France. You can't fire, and so they don't hire. Look at their unemployment rates. And they talk about social solidarity. You know it's not social solidarity. You have a two-class system. The young people are on temporary contracts, and the others are coasting along with contracts that let you do anything you want. You can't be fired. What's good about that? Is that the only solution? No, but that's not good. So general bankruptcy laws, and oh, by the way, it's nice also to have taxes that let the winners keep some of their winnings. You know, and what you get from that, what do you get from that? You get rich people that then make contributions back to start other companies, serial entrepreneurs. You get people in the US, because of our tax code, that make contributions to private institutions. When you go up to MIT, you know, there is not the federal building of research. You know, it's the John Q. Rockefeller, it's the Bill Gates, it's the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. They're the ones who make these contributions, and they do it because of the tax code. Do you know what's different between Croatians and the Americans? Basically nothing. And I mean that. We have 450,000 in the United States. It's what is the policy framework that shapes the way you behave. Now, this is a good news. As you can detect over here, we have a substantial portion of global R&D. About 2/3 of that is private, about 1/3 is public. But when you look at what some of the countries like Korea have done, going way past the UK, or look what China has done, doubling their R&D between 2004 and 2008. Does that mean it's the best spent in the world? No, it doesn't, but it does mean that they're investing in the future. And if you look at the US, this investment here, $30 billion a year, $30 billion a year invested in global health. That's a gift to the globe. There are disease centers of disease control all over the world. We're investing heavily in new energy technologies. This part here, this little sliver, is the National Science Foundation. One of the things that amuses me a lot is that everybody talks about American R&D and they talk about the National Science Foundation. It's an excellent organization. Wonderful to cooperate. One problem, they can't actually send money overseas. But NIH can and does. DOD can and does. And this is not secret money, this is open money for open publications. If your research is good and of interest to them, they'll fund it. This is what they do. They're doing it in Germany today, they're doing it in the Czech Republic. One of our great advantages is a robust financial sector. But one of the other great advantages is that financial sector is relatively open to new ideas. When you hear about Israel, look at the way Israel has connected itself with the United States. Is there any reason you can't do that? You may not have the same initial success, but how often have you tried? Where is the national program that's focusing on being able to attract that type of capital? We have top universities. You know this, but when you're thinking of partnering, could I humbly suggest to you that it's not just the top 10. There's actually a lot more, and often a lot more interesting universities. Apparently you've got some strength here in robotics. I would love to see some cooperation between Carnegie Mellon University and Pittsburgh. They're one of our key centers. Or the University of Akron in polymers. And I would hope at some point to be able to bring the president of the University of Akron here. Why? Because he has transformed the university, which has transformed his region and created jobs and opportunities in a place that was depressed economically a few years ago. Does it still have challenges? Yes. But that's an interesting model, and I would submit a more interesting model than just going over and looking at MIT and thinking, God, how are we ever going to do this? Well, actually, we don't know how to do MIT. It just grew that way. But my main point is there's a lot more to the US system than MIT and Stanford and MIT, okay? You really need to keep that in mind. So what about Croatia? Well, now we go to the area where you know a great deal more than I, but my understanding is that you have a very strong tradition of invention here. And I commend you for inventing the ballpoint pen. This is extremely useful. And there are a lot of pilots who think that parachutes are a good idea. But one of the questions is, where are those products being produced? So what you want to do is not only invent them, you want to innovate with those products, and you want to produce them here. And you can do that. What do you have to do? Well, our friends at the OECD have pointed out some of the obvious things. Increasing investments in R&D. And my sincere, friendly, but direct challenge to you is, shall we talk for the next 5 years about increasing R&D, or shall we do it? Is there a way you can get a dedicated tax? Can you reallocate funds? Chile has put a tax on the exports of their copper so that they have a regular, stable funding for their R&D and innovation budgets. Can you do something similar? I don't know the answer to that. You do. You can figure that out. But I don't think, and we may want to invest in different types of R&D. I've worked in a number of countries where, some of the researchers want you to send them the money, ask no questions, the science is too complicated for you to understand. And by the way, I'm on vacation this month anyhow. So, just send money, ask no questions. I don't think that's right. I think the researchers owe a responsibility to the country. But you have to be able to enhance your investments in that sector. Strengthening science and industry cooperation, again, easy to say. So how do we do that? Well, we do that through incentives. How do we make it possible to actually work? Above all, what you have to avoid is this little trap where the ministers make speeches about science-industry cooperation, and the rector grades each of the professors on the number of publications and only on the number of publications. Professors are not as stupid as they act. They really will get the joke, and they'll only do publications. So where are the incentives? Where are the connections? I've already talked about removing some barriers to entrepreneurship and coordinating policies. You care about Croatia, then you've got to get parties, you've got to get people who cooperate, who trust, and who will work together. Can anyone from the outside do that for you? No. But you know that you have to do it. So, how do we get small businesses going? Why do they matter? Well, they generate taxable wealth to keep the game going. They create welfare-enhancing technologies. Does anyone think that Steve Jobs was not a useful guy on the planet? I think most of us would. They can also increase competition, which lowers prices. And people, I'm sometimes amused when people say, well, you have these big companies in the United States. We don't know how to get big companies. Well, it's the same way you get big basketball players. They come out as little babies, and they grow. Not all of them grow the same way. But, Google only dates to 1998. Although I have to tell you that when my son was in high school a few years ago, he asked me, Dad, did you use the internet very much when you were in high school? And I said, well, no, actually, we hadn't invented it. We only invented it a few years ago, son. And he said, what did you guys do? And it's a good question. But you're here in the Balkans, but you have never been more connected in history to the rest of the world. There just is no place you can't reach, no topic you can't research. And by the way, maybe just because I've used older technologies, when you want to talk with someone, use the phone. I get these emails all the time. Could you send me all your main findings on innovation? Dear sir, thank you very much. Actually, I don't know how to answer those emails. Send him a book. What do you do? But a phone conversation can be useful. And we're not far away. So one of the problems we have in the US, and I think we suffer through sometimes here, is that if you've got a good idea, the market will necessarily fund it. That sounds good, doesn't it? It actually is very Calvinistic. You can, if you've got a good idea, you get money. If you're blessed, you will be wealthy. And obviously, if you're not wealthy, well then, not blessed. Everybody can go home at night knowing that everything that should be has been funded. The reality, of course, is it's very hard to figure that out. Case in point, we've heard of Google. Guess who had trouble raising money to start the company, to grow the company? Google. Turned down by the venture capitalists, which I'll come back to in a minute. Those venture capitalists who turned them down, by the way, every night they cry quietly in their bed thinking that they could have invested in Google. But it's because it's very hard to know whether ideas will work or won't work. So you get this valley of death when you move from the science into the applied. Tell them I'm not here, please. When you get from the science to the applied research, you often go into this valley, and this valley of death does not represent bad ideas.
it often represents excellent ideas that simply don't have the capital or the right team in place to develop them. So you want to be able to have a way for them to get money. And one of the challenges we have, and I regret some of the ministers aren't here, is ministers figure if they do something to intervene, they'll always end up here. But that's like saying you've put together a good basketball team and so you're confident they'll make all their shots. Actually, that's not how it works. But you do have to keep shooting, don't you, if you're going to win a basketball game. So it's just like basketball. You've got to be able to take a shot without being penalized for shooting or penalized for missing. And you've got to be able to keep doing it. There's a portfolio effect, where the more often you have a shot, the more likely you are going to succeed. One of the things that troubles me a lot in Europe is what I call the venture capital obsession, or the venture capital excuse. Every policy meeting I go to, they say, the problem is we don't have venture capital. Oh, really? Do you have a lot of deal flow? No. Well, actually, you know, that's what attracts venture capitalists, is having a lot of companies that you can invest in. So create the companies. It's the first step. By the way, if they're really good opportunities, trust me, they'll show up. They used to say that venture capitalists in California only invested a day's drive away from their home until there were deals in China, and then it was a day's flight. And trust me, it's a long flight. It's only about 16 hours of flying time, not counting the travel time. By the way, I'm very grateful to our sponsors, because I pointed out when I came that I generally like to have 1 minute of speaking time for every hour of travel, and they've been kind enough to allocate that time. So the point is that venture capitalists have limited information on new firms. They also are really tied up in fashion. One year they're investing in bio, the next year they're investing in nano, the next year they're investing in solar, and that's what they want to invest in. So is venture capital useful? Absolutely. Is it a great asset for the United States? Yes. But this is what we do in seed. Only 3% of the venture capital goes to seed, under $1 billion, 900 million, 400 deals. Do you really think that 1 billion and 400 deals is what's driving the whole American economy? No, it isn't. Is it helpful? Yes. Is it an asset? Absolutely. But you can do this without having the venture capital. And by the way, you might want to have some laws that allow venture capitalists to do what they need to do, like carrying losses forward or being able to shift funds around Europe. You hear the lament, we don't have venture capital. But when you say, well, can you make adjustments to make it more possible for venture? Oh, no, that's not our tradition. Our Ministry of Finance doesn't want to do that. Oh, I see. Well, then keep all your basketball players at 5 feet, and we'll just see how the game works. But that won't work so well, will it? So can you make a policy change to make it more attractive? Can you generate the companies to attract outside capital? Can you generate capital internally? How do we do it in the States? We have a secret sauce, personal savings. We have friends, family, and fools. You can ask my wife. I was in this latter category here on Invest. She'll be happy to explain to you. But if you look at the venture capitalists, you're more likely to get a bank loan than you are to get venture capital. Again, is this important? Yes, it's really important for the scaling, but it's not the only game. So let's get past the excuse. So what do we do in cowboy capitalist America? Well, we use federal, national money to help small companies. We spend roughly under $3 billion a year. And how do we do this? What type of loan do we use? What conditional loan? What type of interest rate? What type of grace period? We have a secret sauce. We give them the money. It's like scholarships for companies. If you're a promising company, and we have some need for it in the government, or if we think it has some social potential, we give you the money. It's competitive. There are 3 phased awards. This is a key point. Why the phasing? Because remember what I described for the venture capitalists? We don't know what will succeed. So when our Spanish friends before the crisis were giving out €1 million grants to promising, €1 million grants to promising companies, that's crazy. Why? Because you'll never have enough money to give it to enough companies, and often they don't need that much when they're starting. You just want to see if it will work. So we give, in a phase 1, $150,000. Only 20% of the companies that apply get it. And we want them to answer questions for the government. Sometimes we want products, sometimes we want knowledge. For example, the river is polluted. What is it polluted with? How much is there? How could we remediate that? What would we do to fix it? This is a real question. This happens all the time. Do you have anybody in this country that could figure that out? Yes, you can. Get them an award and you can start an environmental company. Sometimes it's very basic things. We have troops in Afghanistan, unfortunately. It's cold up there. We needed better gloves. We have, as some of you may know, a couple small vehicles that are cruising around on the planet Mars. We needed instruments to look for water. So, who can develop an instrument that is very strong, very light, and very efficient in power usage to look for water? Well, small companies were able to figure that out. Not Boeing, not Lockheed Martin, not the great big companies, but small ones. If you're successful in this feasibility study, you can get up to $1 million in a second phase. Now this begins to get interesting. $1 million attracts people's attention. And if you're very good at that, there's a phase 3 where you can get several more $1 million. That's a recent evolution in the program. You also attract government investment that is non-SBR program, and you attract private investment. Why private investment? Because this represents 2 stages of due diligence and a potential market. Does it work? Well, we'll get back to that. Its best practice features are that it's decentralized and flexible. It's focused where that first money is the hardest to get, where you need something outside. The banking system simply won't and probably shouldn't give you money. You have to have good science, but you also have to have a commercial plan. It's a large scale. But when we researched in the program, we found that about 20 to 25% of the companies were created because of the program. So there are 2 points there. One, this is a way to pool ideas right out of the university. I have a secret for you. When I was growing up, I thought university professors just did it for the love of science. And you know, they do for the love of science. But strangely enough, they're also interested in money. Who would have thought? But apparently they have kids, they have wives, they have houses and mortgages and cars. So we get what we call the Porsche effect. Do you know what the Porsche effect is? It's when Professor John drives up and he sees that Professor Paul has a really nice car, has graduate students working for him, has a company, his courses are full, and he's seen as a good guy working on making the environment a better place. That's the Porsche effect. And guess what? John begins to apply for an SBR award. It is converting the government investment in research into things that work for the society. You want more money for research? Those of you who are scientists here? Well, what do you think is more compelling to the minister? You explaining that you just got a really good publication in a good journal, or that there's a company employing 65 people where he's elected from? Trust me, choice 2 is the right choice. Is that a bad thing? No, because from the origins of the Republic in the United States, our goal in funding research has been to help the society. One of the things the program does is encourage partnering between universities and small companies. There are other ways to do it, and these are not exclusive. I was recommending to some of your policy friends here yesterday to copy the Dutch program on vouchers. It's one way of encouraging it. SBR is a complementary way. These are not exclusive. Another point here is not just the company creation, but company growth. 75% of these companies already exist. Only too often we get the startup obsession. We want to start up a new company. No, very often you can reinforce existing companies that are not suffering from those early stage growth. So does this program work? Well, it depends what you mean by work, doesn't it? It creates jobs. It solves problems for the Mars rover. There's a lot of innovation success. But let's think here a minute. Those tools for the Mars rover, they're probably not going to go into mass production, are they? But they solve a national mission, and that's what you want. Some of them do extremely well. Many of you may have heard of, are you familiar with Qualcomm? How many of you are? Show some hands. Actually, I should see every hand, because you've got a piece of Qualcomm in your pocket if you have a cell phone. And I doubt there's anybody here who doesn't have a cell phone. It got a number of phases early on because the CDMA technology that it uses was considered very risky, very doubtful. Private investors were not interested. So what happened? They got SBIR awards. They proved their technology. They attracted private investment, not venture investment. And today they employ about 18,000 people, and the company's worth $120 billion. There are 26,000 people who work in the supply chain all around San Diego. Would you consider that a success? We do. And did we know it would happen? No. And did we know the technology would work for sure? No. But we tried. And we gave them several awards. And that's what happened. This is one of my favorite stories. You've got two space capsules, right? And you want to bring them together, but you can't do it the way we park in New York by crashing into the next car. You actually have to do it very, very gently. So NASA got a technology that lets you bring two space capsules together for docking. It worked wonderfully. And after they got that contract, guess what? Not so many space capsules. Not really a mass market. So they decided they would try something else, and it didn't work. And they did that for 7 years. Nearly went bankrupt 3 times before they realized that what God had intended was this to be used for eye surgery. Because that rapid adjustment meant that you could focus on the eye and adjust rapidly to the eye movements that occur even when someone is unconscious. So you have LASIK surgery. May I ask without embarrassment, has anyone in the room had LASIK surgery? I would think maybe 20%. One. I don't believe you. You're just not telling me. So why do entrepreneurs like SBIR? Have you ever heard the song from Dire Straits, "It's Money for Nothing"? You know? You don't lose control of your company. You don't have to pay it back. Is this sweet or what? You keep your own IP. You don't pay any royalties. And by the way, when you get these, it attracts private investment to you. They want to join you. This is more important than you might think. I was up at Carnegie Mellon University talking to the robotics lab that I mentioned. It's one of the best in the country. The guy I was talking to had a company. He got venture funding early. He lost completely control of the company. He was crushed down and out. You know, he has like 2%. You get this, you can build your company, you can increase your value, and if you do accept outside money later on, you're in a much stronger position. By the way, his comment is, I wish I had applied for SBIR. Why do government agencies like it? Because it's a way of exploring things without spending too much money. Something that I think is really important here is it diversifies the government supplier base. Let me tell you a secret. You have an oligopoly supply system here. Your ministries buy from the same people over and over and over, same companies over and over again. So how do you get new ideas in? How do you get, for example, a syringe that protects the nurse if she's treating an HIV patient? Well, SBIR figured out a way to do that, an SBIR company. It's a way of getting things faster, better, cheaper, and it works on a small scale. The teams that work with industry are those that publish more peer-reviewed publications. There's not a trade-off here. Plenty of good questions that are derived from conducting with industry. This is a 21st century university, one that is working with up-to-date laboratories on real market questions, one that collaborates with industry, one that does curiosity-driven research but also does applied research, one that figures out a way to commercialize. And by the way, SBIR and prizes inside the university can be a great way of starting to pull ideas out. Have a competition where every university, and you certainly have plenty of universities here, are competing with each other for the best idea, both within the university and then across the universities, and those are candidates for government support as you go forward. And you want to generate students that are actually ready to work in a company. So how do you do that? Well, you need a visionary university leadership. One of the countries I work with in Central Europe, I asked the rector how he got elected. And it's one of the best universities, good university. He said, oh, it's very simple. If you promise not to change anything, you can get elected. So what you need are people who are willing to change, but you need those incentives that I talked to for the faculty. You need student internships. You know, I was actually in a university they were talking about how to do software, and they had a Microsoft company not far, part of Microsoft not far away, and I said, well, do you bring the guys in from Microsoft to teach? And they said, no, they're in industry. We're university professors. I said, well, maybe the guys in Microsoft know a little bit about software, don't you? Maybe, possibly, you know? Maybe they could come and help talk about their current issues and get to know your students, and maybe you could take a sabbatical and go work for a year in Microsoft. And maybe there could be more internships, right? And maybe they could donate equipment, right, with the right tax incentives? Yeah. I mean, after all, that's where the students are supposed to go eventually, aren't they? So how do you tighten that up? And how do you train students so that they know what Microsoft needs and perhaps found their own company and be a supplier to Microsoft because they have contacts in there? We can't have these castles on one hill and castles on another. That's not how it works. And one of the things you need, I was up in Bratislava talking to their government, and they explained with some chagrin that when Google came, because they're good in there, they're good up there, as you're good down here. And he said, okay, so we want to invest, where's your park? And they said, oh, well, actually, we've been working on getting a park together for some time. We're soon, in just a few years, we'll get a park. Do you imagine talking to Google about in a few years you're going to get a park? You know, it doesn't float. But what you can do is get these small companies, these large companies, have the government funding, have it close in, not off in some distant place, and you can build a park. I've talked about vouchers, I've talked about SBR awards, I've talked about teachers from industry. We need to have entrepreneurial leave so that a professor can leave and start a company and actually come back, for sure, if it doesn't work. This is all possible, but it has to be both implemented in principle and then actualized in practice. You also need an international strategy, obviously. So, 3 points. And believe it or not, I'm coming close to my conclusion. As John Kenneth Galbraith said famously, the Canadian-American economist, about halfway through your talk, you should always say in conclusion, just to give your audience hope. So, you need to work with the EU, with the US, and with East Asia. Why cooperate with Europe? Well, obviously, it's where you are. You have this huge new opportunity I've mentioned. But again, I insist that you have to be able to use the European opportunity to leverage your national strategy. One of the things that I like about SBIR, it's a national program to meet national needs with national companies. You do it here. Does the EU like SBIR? They've just adopted it for an EU-wide program. So they like the idea. Where do you think they came to talk about it? I'll let you guess who they talked to. But you need to work also with the United States. Why? It's where the money is. We're the largest expenditure on R&D on the planet. More importantly, it's a porous system. You can come to the US, you can cooperate with them, you can work with Croatians if you want. It's a porous innovation system. It's open to ideas, open to products, and open to you. I'm not here just as an advertisement for the US. It's like, get the joke. That's where the money is. That's where the opportunity is. You can sell into that market. You can learn from that market. And it's not an exclusive opportunity. You also want to export to your friends in East Asia. So you need to follow best practice. And I didn't put it up there, but I should put up, you need to follow this now. You know, I really hope to have the privilege of coming back here and talking with some of you again. But I really would not want to come back here 2 years from now and see that your plans are advanced. We don't want plans. We want execution. Remember, we talk a lot about Silicon Valley. They have a famous expression out there. Do you know what it is? Execution, execution, execution. Thank you very much for your attention.